definitely seems to connect something in relation to the, sorry about that, I tried to get rid of the recording and process thing and did something else instead. Okay, we'll stick with that. It doesn't seem like it wants to do it now. Anyway, yeah, I was going to say we could have thrown in the environmental thing, which of course in Glasgow in particular, we're very concerned about that at the moment, because we've got this big conference coming up in a couple of weeks' time, actually. And so in fact, some of you might have seen on social media a prayer that we've written, the two of us, for an event that Olive was part of in Trinity College, Glasgow. Was it yesterday?
Yeah, last night, yeah, the same time.
Same time, yeah. Okay, what else have we got here? Yeah, well, here's some insights from various research. This has all come from, if we ask ourselves what has been going on in the last 18 months, then here we've got research that largely comes from Durham University, its digital theology research group. And it tells a really interesting story here, that when we were thrown into this 18 months ago, 85% of all UK churches did something to connect with people using the medium of the digital medium of online, whatever that might have meant. A third of those churches created pre-recorded material. 45% produced real-time programs, which was, when you think of people who were in churches who'd never done any of this stuff before, to be ready to do real-time stuff and put yourself out there with all the possibility of making a mess of it and not being able to get it to change it, to make it better, I think that showed a degree of courage for one thing, and also experimentation and imagination that perhaps you wouldn't have thought many of us actually had, to go for it like that. Repeatedly, we've met with people and talked with people who said, well, actually, you know, our midweek prayer meeting in particular has had new life as a result of us not needing to go to a church building. And largely that's been due to people saying, well, actually, yeah, I never could make it for 7 o'clock at night because I didn't get home from work till like 6:30. And I then had to have some food and be at least polite to the other people who live in my house, whereas actually I could just turn on the computer in the corner and be part of it. And if I really wanted, I could close my camera down so nobody knew that I was eating my tea at the same time. And I guess some of you will have had that same experience of your prayer meetings or other midweek groups really taking off in terms of attendance and engagement. And
different generations, where there was small children in the house, where if there were two parents in the house, they couldn't both get out. So they could, provided the kids were off to bed or occupied, could actually be part of it. So, and particularly with dark nights coming in, a lot of elderly people don't really want to go out. There's safety, you know, if it's bad weather or just fear of the dark or not being able to get a lift. So, and people who would have had different sorts of disabilities that prevented them, it's made it very accessible for many people, which wasn't the case before.
No, it wasn't.
Much more easily accessible.
Yes, yeah. Now, it becomes a surprise when you discover that 55% of churches, more than half of them, had bigger online numbers than they'd ever had recently, at least in their buildings. 45% of them had smaller numbers, but notice this one, that 25% of them more than doubled their engagement. Now, of course, those figures kind of hide a few things because it's notoriously difficult to count online engagement. For example, some of you, I'm not looking at what you're doing with your screens now, but you all know that it would be possible to turn your camera off, mute yourself, and go off and do something entirely different, and then come back in 30 minutes' time here and look as if you'd been engaged the whole time. So counting is rather complicated, but these are significant numbers, I think, because they were sustained throughout the period of lockdowns and so on. The negative side of this, of course, is that somewhere around about 30% of regular churchgoers fail to connect at all. Some of them just transferred and engaged with different churches, and others just dropped out. I think that figure is quite significant because information that's coming in now that churches have begun meeting again in something that looks like what we did before, a figure of somewhere around about 30 to 40% down seems to be quite a common experience anyway. So maybe some of those 30% of people who didn't connect were just people who were going to drop out of church anyway, or had big questions and issues. But of course, there's also the question of some older people who didn't have the technology or the ability or the connections or whatever. And of course, others who, because they were struggling with all sorts of economic issues, didn't have the kind of houses, for example, that would easily lend themselves to that kind of engagement on a regular basis. But the next one that's down here is also interesting, that 25% plus ranges, depending on which surveys you look at, somewhere between 25% and about 28% of the population appear to have connected regularly with something that could be called online worship. Mostly YouTube, some Facebook, whereas the previous usual attendance, as you all know, was more or less around about 6% of the UK population would have regarded themselves as having any sort of regular connection with a church. An even more significant one is that more than half of young adults, that is people aged 18 to 34, connected. Especially interesting in prayer, things like the daily office, Compline, as well as connecting with worship services. Now, that is a statistic that is well borne out with our experience here, because when the whole business started, you might recall that, well, you were probably invited by some local group or other to take care of your community. There will be people who need groceries delivered, people who need medications delivered. Will you volunteer to do that? And when I saw that, I ticked some of those boxes, but on the form or the website, whatever it was that I was engaged with, website, I think, there was another box that said, is there anything else you would like to offer? And in that box, I said I could offer spiritual care. Now, those are words that I chose very carefully. Care was already in there because people were saying, let's care for our community. And of course, I had a good idea that spirituality would be a good word to use for a whole variety of reasons. And I didn't expect to hear much about it, to be honest. But within no time at all, I was getting inquiries. People referred to me who'd gone to that website and said, yes, I would love to have a conversation with somebody about my spiritual care, which could range from lots of different things, of course, because the word spirituality is so appealing because it's so ambiguous and can mean lots of different things to different people. But one thing that struck me right away was that there was a preponderance of young men in particular, more young men than young women, in pretty much exactly that age group that's mentioned there. I would say maybe 18s to maybe 40s rather than 34. And their questions were all about prayer, like way out in front of anything else. And it was interesting that I don't recall having a conversation with anybody asking the kind of traditional questions that Christians would think of. Things like, why are good people suffering like this? Those big kind of philosophical, ideological questions just didn't seem to feature. The questions were much more oriented to, okay, so how do I get from today through to tomorrow and with some kind of connection with myself and with some sort of transcendent reality, whoever or whatever that is, i.e. prayer. And I mean, I got some very strange questions. Not just what is prayer, but how do you pray? I mean, what are you supposed to do? And is it all right for me to pray if I'm not sure whether I'm a person of faith or not? And other people were asking, what if I mean, can you get it wrong? What happens if you get the prayer wrong? Which had a sort of backstory to it, which was something like, well, if the God I'm not sure I believe in gets angry with me, what's going to happen next? You know? And to date, I mean, it's dropped off a lot now, obviously, but to date, I've certainly connected with somewhere around about 3,000 people in the last 18 months. And I know roughly how old they are because virtually all of them wanted this kind of conversation face to face. So it's guesswork and anecdotal to some extent what I'm saying, but that is where we're at, I think, in a big sort of way. That so many young adults have connected, being given permission to ask these kinds of questions, which tells us something. So why did this happen? Well, you can see the red boxes at the bottom here. I think in some respects it was a kind of retro experience, you know? It was like going back to the 1950s. There was nothing else to do on a Sunday because everything else was closed and you couldn't go anywhere. So what else did you do but turn on the television or your computer or whatever and see what was out there that might look vaguely interesting? And of course, we got lots of visitors from other churches, didn't we? People who once were part of our churches, but now live on the other side of the country or even the other side of the world, or people who were just curious to see what was going on. So I think we can feed that in, but that is still a lot of people when you look at those percentages there. So clearly we did connect overall, not every church, obviously, but overall, Christians connected with more people as a consequence of the pandemic than would otherwise have been the case.
And I think that pushes us to think, here's an opportunity, it's a bit like a window that we need to act now, not just sort of think and discuss and talk for a long, long time. We might not feel we know exactly what to do, but it's worth trying to keep that connection going. The online church, who's it connecting with? Well, you'll have your own list of people that you think, but we've already mentioned housebound people, people sick one way or another, elderly, but also people who were really afraid of going out, people who had to self-isolate for medical conditions because they were more vulnerable. And that, of course, created lots of problems mentally. Well, lots and lots of people have found that their mental health has taken a bit of a bash, so some more seriously than others. People, when they were working, when on-site church meets were able to go. And I think that's been quite important, often as well because people recorded services as well as them being on. They were able to listen at a different time. People who did have to travel for their work, because there still were people like that, and of course in a much more isolated world, still felt they had some place of connection. People trying church out who may come on site eventually, but not now. They're sort of having a look at us, a bit like being stalked, really. But I think this shows how important our online presence is, whether that's church, what church is putting on, or individually. I found a significant number of people I've had one-to-one connections with because I know them in some social platform, and they've asked me these sorts of questions that John was asking, was telling you about through the spiritual care program. Contacts around the world. I heard people saying as well who are maybe living in a different country and couldn't get back home, or were feeling very distanced from their families, and the only way they could meet was online. So Zoom for them became a real gift. I know even for myself, I ended up doing a bit of homeschooling for my grandchildren who live nowhere near me. I'm in Scotland, they're in Wales. And I was doing baking online with them. But it's enabled that kind of connection. That wasn't church, but that whole thing about how do we nurture, because church life isn't just about turning up at services. So how about all the other range of things that are around church, the mentoring, the looking out for one another, the caring, noticing that somebody's missing? How does all that kind of thing help? Or your intuition that, well, I haven't even spoken to that person or had an email or been online. I wonder if they're all right. It happened to me only yesterday. I phoned up somebody who I hadn't heard from for 2 or 3 weeks. And because I usually do, I was beginning to think, and I phoned up. And the answer was, we've both had COVID. We're just about coming out. I was really glad that I'd got in touch. And then digital natives, those of us in my kind of age group, we have to work at the digital stuff and keep asking the same questions over and over again. But for young people, that's where they live. You ask them about a friend and you say, where did you meet them? And they look at you and they're like, oh, well, I haven't met them face to face. They're just somebody I know because I met them online. So that's a lot going on. But I think what's a real surprise about this new generation of spiritual searchers, on one hand, you've got somebody like Russell Brand has recently been putting videos up. He's been doing it for quite a while, but he's been talking about prayer. And only yesterday or the day before, was it, we came across a survey published in The Guardian, particularly aiming at, I think it was teenage to about 35 age group of people. Oh yes, it's there. It says 18 to 34. I remembered it reasonably well. How do they express their spiritual side? Now, if two kind of quite iconic mediums there in our society are taking this and putting it out, it says there's something going on that we need to sit up and pay attention to, I think.
It certainly does, yes, because Russell Brand, if you go to YouTube and look at any of his videos, you'll see that he has hundreds of thousands, and in some cases millions of followers listening, and he's talking about prayer in a very kind of upfront, practical way as well, isn't he?
Which you might not have believed a few years ago.
You would not. Well, he says he wouldn't.
He says
that
he talks about what we would actually refer to as a kind of testimony or a journey. Where he's at in that spiritual journey is not for us to judge, but it's interesting what's happening.
Yep. So how about the new future? Well, we've got all those things down the left that we're all familiar with, that more people are working at home. More people seem to be both in work and out of work. At one time, we were doing so much shopping, there was a shortage of cardboard boxes because we were getting so much stuff delivered. Hospitality's being impacted, sport, and then the whole thing of poverty is coming in there. So if you're looking for an agenda for mission, then those are some of the key things, not the only things that we need to be reflecting on. But I think we need to be aware that how different church people, I'm using the word church there in terms of, the people who are the church rather than gatherings or buildings. I think it's changed the members of churches, lifestyles, health very often, fear. There will be an element that once you get out of the habit, I know it's easy to criticize people who see church as a habit, but to be honest, once you get out of the habit of connecting with a church congregation on a Sunday morning, then it's harder than you think, harder than most of us think, to actually rediscover that habit, because something else will have come in to fill that point in your life. A lot of churches are having financial challenges, individuals who've perhaps got demands that they didn't have before, congregations who were funded effectively by people who physically attended and put money in plates or bags. In particular, those kinds of contributions have just disappeared. We're now discovering actually that some of the people who we thought were not important in church life, tech-savvy people, they might actually be the key figures taking us forward into this new digital world. And overall, I think there's a growing awareness of a need for new ways of doing stuff. I mean, it's a good question, that one we put in there. Will people who've loved informal interaction on Zoom go back to just sitting and saying nothing and listening to long sermons? You know, and will those of us who preach those sermons, who discovered that actually sitting in front of a computer is a different thing to standing 10 feet above contradiction or whatever, that it's a different style that's required, a different kind of more informal kind of presentation that's required. There's just a general sense, I think, that whatever we now do can't be just going back, or at least we'll have missed something really important if we just go back to where we were.
And I think it throws up very much the same things been coming through children's engagement or disengagement with online, with school and with learning, that it's not just about listening to the teacher's voice, it's how do we engage? And I think that that point about engagement, we have to do things differently to invite people to engage online. And there's something here about, we've got technology and we've got a medium that can do different things. We have a responsibility to discover what those things are.
We do, yes.
And it's not even just about words and printing. I mean, you can draw, you can do a paint, you can paint on a screen.
You can.
I've learned more from my grandchildren. So, I mean, actually, maybe having somebody who's about 6 or 7 on the deciding committees might be really helpful.
Yeah. I mean, these things in the bottom are really interesting because most of the challenges, there's nothing new in this, really. The manifestations and symptoms of it are new, maybe, but fundamentally, the changes that have been forced upon us would all have happened anyway, but maybe they'd have taken 10 years for them to happen, whether in society or in lifestyles more generally, or in church life in particular. So really what the pandemic has done has said, look, you know, this needs to be addressed. Missional questions, structural questions, questions of what it means to be church. Now you can't avoid them any longer. And for many of you, it's going to be a matter of life or death. And we know a number of congregations for whom that is literally the case. They are now at a point where they literally will have to change or just go out of existence. It's as simple as that. So it's focusing minds in ways that, we want to finish this with a rather a more encouraging kind of note, don't we? Yeah.
A unique opportunity for change. Yes, it's so unique. We're kind of like rabbits caught in the headlines and the headlights some of the time. The virus it stopped us short, didn't it? Because we all just got really busy. But it's not just about busyness that's not going to produce the goods. It can be very easy to be busy and then feel that, well, we're doing the right thing just because we've got too much to do. Just think of all the extra number of meetings that we really don't need to have. One of the things that's made us realize it is when we're on Zoom and we know that after being on Zoom for an hour, it's recommended that, you know, you should get up and be doing stuff, move around. It's exhausting and people have found it really exhausting. So why do we need so many meetings? Or do we need, you know, if we haven't got an agenda and questions that really need answered, it's easy enough to cancel a meeting. You know, I think we're finding that. And we can do things in different ways. We can ask really basic questions and focus on the purpose, you know, instead of getting sidetracked. And we can let go of some things and reimagine and repurpose. I mean, some of the things that would have been done in the past, there are things like meditation, reflection. It is interesting how, for many people, that's coming to the fore as the way that has helped them through the pandemic. Well, what does it mean spiritually to have time of space and reflection? And learning from our experience, deep and wide, that was an old song when I was a kid in Sunday school. Many people are spiritually thirsty. That is so true. I mean, I had a message from somebody who I know well, lives nowhere near me, lives hundreds of miles away in the south, but is a pagan. And I got a question from her saying, wait for it, are there any places in the Bible that I could look at in relation to this problem that I've got? That was probably the last question I expected from her. But it started a deeper conversation going on about all sorts of things. And again, particularly about prayer. It's not just about being trendy. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes we can make if we think, just tinkering with the edges and maybe doing something with some music or maybe with some graphics. It's much more basic than that. We've got things in our tradition that I was talking about this to a group on Monday nights that I'm teaching in Glasgow University. Having gone into a coffee shop and picked up a book that was on rituals, and the sort of things that were in this book were, wait for it, cleansing, anointing, refreshment. And this is a book that's just being sold on a shelf, in the station sort of bookshop with all the magazines, people picking that up and looking at it. So what are the things that are not just things we think about, but the things that we do? I mean, the same question comes in to any congregation. If you're in leadership or a minister, how do you motivate what you're speaking about or talking about to translate beyond the sermon so that it's something that people carry and do and practice that enriches them 24/7? So we have lots of ancient traditions that perhaps recycling, upcycling, as a term that we use today, might be something that we should be thinking about. Recreating community where people can connect and easily be fully human, opening our doors wide. I mean, the project last night that won the Sterling Architectural Prize this year was one that's in Kingston, but it's part of a university, but it's been built with the expectation, and the design of it is so that people almost flow in off the street and they don't have to, like, going to, well, certainly some church offices I know in Scotland you go to, you almost need frisk to go through the door, or you need to show up past the wire. But it was so that people would drift in and be part of. In that particular university, most of the students, they are the first person in their family who've gone on to further study. But the whole of the architect who designed, the lead architect, was actually saying in his speech afterwards, it's been designed so that you can go right into the whole building and up to the top and see out over the whole area. You can use the computers, you can have access to all the other things that are there. And if you think about how we're talking today in church, how do we create community? How do we do that within the communities where we live? What's this last bit? Be mobile, go where people are. Well, that's a big thing, isn't it? Not expecting them to come into us. And sometimes that's been our big mistake in the church. We always issue an invitation to come to a service, or how about coming in, which really is about inviting them onto our territory where we're comfortable, and don't know if there's any football fans among, I can see all ladies' faces there at the moment. Not that you wouldn't watch football, but if all games are played at home, you don't reckon very much to the team. So what does it mean to be in somebody else's space? And what does it mean to be online with other people? Without having to control, mute everybody and tell them, like I'm doing just now.
Absolutely, yes, right. Well, that's us done, I think. So we will move on. We've told you a bit about ourselves there, as well as how we've seen what we've seen, how we've seen things. So we're now going to go into, let me see, there are 20, I think if we go into 3 breakout rooms,
one will have 8.
that gives us that gives us easy numbers, big enough for everybody to have a say if they want to have a say, and big enough that you can stay silent if you wish to be as well. So I think what we're going to do with that, we've got a few questions here, which we're going to put in the chat. and I'll just paste them in there. And these are the questions, okay? So you can all see them in the chat. What have we lost? We're thinking now in terms of your local church, okay? So there won't be a blanket set of answers to these questions. What have we lost during the pandemic that you think, thank goodness, we don't need to do that anymore? What have we lost that should be recovered? Things that are still serviceable and useful as we go forward. What new things have been gained that we seriously need to keep or maybe develop into new directions? What was necessary and useful for the time of the pandemic, but frankly, that was then and this is now, and we don't need to continue that in the future. And then if you have time, well, I suppose talking about those, you're bound to actually interweave the challenges of doing something about it throughout health and share the benefit of whatever wisdom you have with the rest of us, please.
Busyness. Came across very strongly that time-wasting meetings can be done online with far less hassle.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I've heard that from quite a few people. Yes, empathise with that. Yeah, thank you, Ruth. Yeah.
Meeting people socially, cups of tea and chats. Time together.
Right, yes, yeah. Any other thoughts on that one?
Talked about losing the kind of the false idea that somehow online ministry isn't ministry, and that finally the kind of shackle around online not being a geographical location, that somehow it's less, that those kind of thoughts that have been lingering for a while, they seem to have been kicked into the grass for most people now.
Yes, yeah.
Somebody mentioned the travelling between areas for area meetings.
Yes.
And when they were able to do it online, it saved travelling time as well.
Yes, I imagine now we're moving into darker nights shortly and winter time as well. That's a particular, and of course it's saving money as well as time.
Yes, yeah.
Carbon footprint as well.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. Thank you for that, Pamela. Yeah.
I think that's a biggie, Pamela, not just for us, but also when we think of people going in their work, going to meetings. Several of our family we know who have the responsibility of doing a lot of traveling because of the nature of the work, actually saying that's not happening anymore. And that's between an architect, a medic, and a lawyer. So three very sort of almost old-fashioned professions. Actually saying that.
Yeah.
So there are going to be other ways we can connect with people too.
Yes, yeah. So what we've lost that should be recovered, we should definitely get back. Maybe you need to reinvent them, but things that we want to get back.
We've lost our children's work.
Right, good one.
No junior church, no messy, no toddler group.
Right.
Right.
Desperate for it to come back.
Right.
So is there a possibility of that coming back, do you think?
It's our junior church has decided to start in November. I coordinate Messy, and that has been suggested to start in November too. But whether I'll be able to get the staff 20 months on, a lot of them are becoming firm. I don't know. We'll have to see.
Right.
Yes, well.
Yeah. And would it be the same anyway? Is this one of the things that has to change? I don't know. The big questions.
They are. I mean, that one strikes me as possibilities anyway of exploring whether something like Forest Church would work in that with that sort of group, because it would be outdoors for a start, so you've not got all the infection possibilities and so on floating around.
Good idea.
And there's some resources we saw just in recent weeks that move on from Messy Church and are called Muddy Church. I don't know whether you've heard of that, but
No.
that's a sort of, now we haven't explored it in any detail, but I think it's a sort of forest church for kids kind of thing. So I'm sure if you Google Muddy Church, you'll find whoever it was. So somebody posted on social media that they were doing that anyway.
Well, there's certainly plenty of mud around here.
Well, there you go. Yes. It just struck me that the outdoors thing might something worth looking at anyway, you know. Yeah.
The Forest Church sort of network, they've got Facebook pages and website and things, but they've got quite a lot of resources. They share resources that, you know, different people have tried out. And that can be enormously helpful, not just having to think everything up from scratch.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that.
There's a Muddy Church Facebook page.
Oh, well done. We've got a tech whiz amongst us.
Thank you. Good for you. Yes. Thanks, Yvonne. Right. Yeah.
That will be another one that John will spend hours on now. Thank you for that.
Okay. So what are the new things that
have you connected with?
There's 1,500, nearly 1,200 members on that Muddy Church.
Right. It's phenomenal how something grows really speedily, isn't it, with social media?
Yes, that's definitely just a matter of weeks old, I think. It's very recent. Yes, that's good. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. So what have we gained that we'd like to retain or develop in some sort of way? New things that we've discovered. I think you mentioned some of them, of course, the business of meetings. It's a positive as well as a negative, isn't it?
And I think there's a kind of adventurous experimentation that churches have got into, evidenced by, you know, I've been thrilled to see how many ministers have sought to upskill themselves, as well as, you know, wider church members, and jumping into spaces they've never been in before. And I mean jumping in, not even hesitantly, just taking a big leap and things. So that spirit of experimentation and adventure, I think, is fantastic.
Yes. Yeah.
Equally, sorry, we are a bit short of. We need a couple of geeks in our church, because we want to do the on live streaming, and we haven't got the skills to be able to set it all up. So we keep praying for geeks, and we haven't got them yet.
Right. I mean, it strikes me that I've heard that you're not the first person who said that, of course. And one of the things that strikes me is that there'll be lots of younger people out there who would know how to do this stuff for a start. But also, is this a missional opportunity to put a note out into the wider community that we would like to do this? Anybody out there who knows enough to be interested to give us advice or come and join us or whatever. And it wouldn't be the first time that I've come across people coming to faith as a result of getting engaged in doing something practical in a church, you know. So it just strikes me that particularly you're in Ilkeston, I see from your screen. I mean, sort of smallish self-contained communities are the places where that kind of thing would at least have possibilities, I would think.
Yeah, I'll have a go at that.
It's our local library has sort of, I mean, it's changed during COVID, but it's back up again now, like training sessions, but it was the sixth formers actually come and do part of their school work, and their job is to do one-to-one with seniors. So I got in on that. I'm going as a senior, and they were really, really good at explaining in a way that when I say to John, but you're not explaining it so I can understand it. You know, so I think maybe schools are actually quite keen to partner with things like, especially, you know, you could say something like the church wants to do this. We don't know how to. Can you, are there any, you know, and geeky kids will do anything to get out of a maths lesson or whatever. So it might be a possibility.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah. Okay, which one were we at here?
Yeah.
Yes, sorry. Richard, yes.
Yeah, with the fallout with mental health issues through the pandemic, one of the things we'd like to do and looking to do is open up a Renew Wellbeing Centre.
Oh, right.
A place where it's okay to not be okay, you know, the Ruth Rice initiative. And we're in the process of doing that, which we think it would be a very valuable thing to do in our area anyway.
Great.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell the story, just the Grieve In?
Oh, yes,
story?
yes. Well, one of the other things that we're involved with is, some of you know that CMS have a training program in mission leadership for predominantly Anglican pioneer ministers. One of the people I met on that, who's actually a Methodist pioneer in Derby, a person called Joe Bailey, saw a need, an opportunity for people who are grieving, basically, from all sorts of things, loss of babies, loss of parents, loss of jobs, all kinds of stuff. And she started what she calls the Grieve In, which was a really good title, I thought. But anyway, what I was going to say was, no sooner had she floated this idea and talked with a few people, and the local council came in and asked, would you like us to partner with you on that? Because we see it as an opportunity. And so she got space provided, which, as I understand it, is in the city centre somewhere. And they obviously jumped on board with the idea that this was a Grieve In, you know, as in a pub. Well, it wasn't a pub, obviously, but and she started meeting at lunchtimes. I think it was sort of early afternoons. If I say sort of between 1 and 3, it might have been 12 and 2, you know, but that sort of middle of the day time, and found no shortage of people who were indeed grieving. And so I think the way you present these things is really quite important in terms of networking in the local community. I mean, I would never have thought, I could see it was brilliant when she told me, but I wouldn't have thought of it myself, you know? And what I said earlier about people looking for spiritual care, after this thing went viral, which it did, I got a call from the organisers of the whole national network in Scotland, and we had a conversation about how it was going and what to do next. And one of the things that they said to me was that, well, two things. One was, we're absolutely happy with you being a Christian and known to be a Christian, but if you had suggested anything that sounded vaguely churchy rather than spiritual care, we'd have put you on a different list, was what they said, and you'd have gone on a list for conducting funerals, which obviously I would have done, but there was a bit of me thought, well, it's been more exciting ministering to the living than the dead, you know, which of course is not the whole story of funerals, but I thought how interesting that is, that something that didn't sound churchy, that they're quite happy with the churchiness in a sense, of being Christian anyway. But so I think choosing the terminology we use is really quite important, and a matter of, I often think that the most important spiritual gift for today is discernment, and having that discernment to know, you know, what's the best way to present yourself relative to your context. So what will work in my context will not necessarily be, you know, the latest thing for yours. But yeah, I think we've got a lot to learn there about partnerships and so on. Yeah.
I think Richard and Fran are spot on in terms of timing. I think that window, you know, because the health service is so aware, and the medics. I don't know whether either of you are in on that side of things and seeing it at all. But I think when something's a big talking point in society more widely, bringing the two aspects together is well, quite a Kairos moment. We were talking about Kairos moments.
I think it is. Yes, yes.
I'm sure you'll find people to partner with you as well.
Yeah. Because I think increasingly, I think we've passed that point where obviously some people are still virulently anti-Christian, but I think we've passed the point where sort of aggressive atheism was a big thing. And Richard Dawkins and the likes are definitely yesterday's news rather than tomorrow's. And we're increasingly talking about some kind of spiritual dimension to life as well, with various meanings, but really people are asking the question, who am I? Why am I here? What does it all mean? In different ways. Yeah. Well, let's see, what else did we have here? Well, let's jump to the challenges. I mean, you floated some big visions in different ways here. So what are the challenges of that?
One of the things that I noted with great interest, I sort of live on a major road, and people were discovering the joys of shared free time with their families for the first time. You know, off they were going, you know, on 4 or 5 bicycles off for the day together.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are saying we don't want to lose that. And this is, I think, somebody who's fiercely involved in the Keep Sunday Special campaign. You know, this whole business of shared free time and its essential part in family life and building up family lives. And I think this could be one way in which the church does stand up and be counted, can be now stand up and be counted on the issue, because it is absolutely disgraceful how the older generation has let the whole concept of the importance of shared free time slip through our palsied fingers. And now not only Sunday has gone, but the evening has gone. In which, because hours of work have gone into that time where you can, you know, so many people have no energy to do anything with their evenings. They're just so tired when they get home that you know. So I think there is quite an opportunity there for our opportunity to witness at a time when more people than ever could be listening. And to encourage the idea of family-friendly shops that close at 5:30, you know, and that sort of thing.
I think too, there's things that the church can actually be partners with in terms of creating spaces that families do things together. That aren't just services. I think that's the kind of default that we've fallen into in many ways. So, you know, if you mentioned cycling as families around the whole safety thing anyway, but cycling to a point and doing something, it could almost be the cycling version of messy church or whatever. I think it's going back to, well, in my case, thinking of the Celtic roots, where from, you know, the way the Celts had this amazing way of weaving the spiritual through everything that they did through life, not about preaching all the time or spiritualizing it in that kind of sense, but that awareness of God in the whole of life, really. I think there's something that we could be exploring much more there.
Yeah, I was thinking about that earlier today, actually, because next week in another course that we're teaching together in Glasgow Uni, we're looking at Celtic Saints and what we can learn from them. And one of the kind of sound bites from that, in a sense, is that the Celtic Saints set out to form a community out of which congregations or faith communities or worshipping communities, however you want to describe them, emerged. Whereas we tend to want to form a congregation and hope that somehow they all get on together and become a community. And I think there's something really significant in that way of doing things that we need to learn from. So, yeah, that's possibly that's a good point to finish this bit of our deliberations, because we spent a bit longer than we thought we might on that presentation earlier on. So.
Nothing new there.
Nothing new there.
John,
yeah,
sure.
sure.
Can I just ask you a question? Thank you very much for your presentation. And I did like the Kairos with the COVID-19 in the middle of it. Can I just ask you if any research has been done into what happened after the Spanish flu, where we lost even more people? And I just wonder, in terms of recovery from Spanish flu, if we learn it, as you just said, what we can learn, did we learn anything from that?
not that we're aware of. That doesn't mean there wasn't one, of course. But I suspect what happened there was quite soon after that, the First World War came on the scene. So there's been a lot of, there was a double disruption, if you like, there. And there's been quite a lot of research done on the impact of the First World War in terms of church life and Christian belief and so on, which certainly pointed in a direction. I mean, one of the things that emerged big at that time, through that whole period, in fact, was a kind of esoteric spirituality, with people becoming interested in kind of theosophy and Eastern religions and what in some contexts would be called the occult, I suppose, seances and all that sort of stuff. And there is a significant upsurge in that sort of area today, not so much the occult dimension of it, but the sort of notion there has to be more to life than this, which has sort of been encouraged by what Olive said about these multiple dimensions of reality that people are now talking about as well. So, I suspect that the Spanish flu was so soon caught up in the First World War that the two things kind of impacted in similar kinds of ways. But no, you've raised a question that would be really interesting to. We'll now try and find out, I suppose.
Sorry.
The first part of the question is the way research is entered into very quickly now, statistically, and the way you can gather that quite quickly. But maybe there's a PhD thesis in there for you. Just to keep you busy.
Yes, thank you. No.
It's a good question.
I was just thinking about church history. It might be interesting to look back at our own church histories for that and see what was recorded. And what was happening. That might be a way of
Yes, if you've got archives and so on that go back to there, then yes, you'd be able to trace some kind of impacts of one sort and another, wouldn't you? Yeah.
I remember a good Jesuit saying that the Protestant church needed to do a lot of work on the communion of saints. And I think this again is, what about the afterlife? And what about the argument that I remember what one good nun presented me with, which is, I ask my friends on earth to pray for me. Why can't I ask my friends in heaven? It's actually challenging. But, we are very fuzzy on the communion of saints. And at a time of grief and loss and whatnot, there are a lot of questions there that we should be able to answer.
Yes, there have been a lot of questions along those lines. You're absolutely right. Yes, yeah.
I have a question, perhaps not as deep as the previous questions before, but it's just something that came to my head. During the pandemic, I think the communities really saw the role of churches, and in many communities, I think I can say pretty much all over the country, communities joining with many churches and help with food banks, help to deliver medication and all that sort of thing. So my question for you, John and Olive, is, do you have any advice on how can we keep this connection? How can we not lose this connection that was made during the pandemic? I mean, I remember even in my church, during the Easter 2020, we were in a lockdown, I think. Yeah, it was the first lockdown. And my husband is a minister. And he was just like, no, I need to tell people about Christ. I really need to. And we just put a speaker outside our garden, and we just sang together a few hymns, and he just invited people to, obviously not to come close, but just to sing the hymns if they wish to in the community. And for our surprise, a lot of people, even people from other religion, other Muslim, other completely different background, they joined in and they were really happy with that. So there was a connection there, but it seems like that when we got back to the building, there was some sort of lost in there. We that connection. So do you have any advice on how to perhaps reconnect, re-engage to the community?
Yeah, somebody actually said to me, and I'm desperately trying to think who it was, but I think they told me through social media, was that their church had been really involved in, and I think it was probably food banks, but other things within their particular community. And do you know what was said to them? It's been absolutely marvelous the way you've worked with us. Please, are you just going to go back into your churches when it's over? Don't do that, will you? I mean, if ever there was anything prophetic,
yeah, absolutely.
It was almost like, you know, if you were trying to write a story or a parable to get people to get the hang of it. But they actually said this to them. I think this is at the core of it. If we stay, this is not a bashing churches, because I mean, this is who I am and where I am. But you know, if we are unwilling to engage and just think that we have the platform in which we should be telling people how it is, which is why I so warm to Richard and Fran's thing that they see this need and how and where might that happen. And I think the mutual, you know, this thing about not needing to do everything on our own territory. I think our churches and our buildings can be used very, very imaginatively, but not just in the same way like a letting agency where we're letting them out, you know, in order to have, you know, some accountability to come in. But how do we engage with the people?
I mean, I think context is key, obviously, because I'm thinking, you know, you mentioned food banks. Now, one of the other big things coming up in relation to food is is actually shortages of food. So people who are growing their own food are at least feeling better about these shortages, however that works out. Now, this wouldn't work in every church, but I know quite a few churches that have ground around them, not graveyards, just ground around, which is grassed over and which is complicated or costs a fortune to keep the grass cut. Community gardens would be a kind of halfway house because it's on the church property, as it were, but it's out there. It's not behind closed doors. And there's a huge interest in relation to environment. Yeah, Fran's going to tell us you've got one, I suppose.
No, the Hazelnut Community Farm in Bristol are advocating the use of church gardens for growing vegetables. And I'm trying to think what it's called. I think it's called, it's not the Hazelnut. If you look at Hazelnut Community Farm, they've got a website, and then there's a link to community gardens. It's,
right.
Recently, they had Norman Versber and various other people speak on ecology and theology. So it's all that sort of link.
Yes.
But yes, they've got a link where they're trying to encourage the use of church grounds for community gardens.
Yeah. Well, there's another example of the right time and place as well, because 5 years ago nobody would have been that bothered about it, whereas now we've got the environmental issues, we've got the food issues, mental health issues, because being in a garden and doing things, you've got a perfect storm, which is a good storm, if I can put it like that, you know, an opportunity space. So yes.
Yeah, I was just thinking that there's another one, Torridon in, I'm trying to think where it is, near to where Mark and Laura lived.
Todmorden in Yorkshire.
Yes. Is a
and Hebden Bridge, that sort of area that's got a lot of community gardens.
Not only that, but there's the first sort of international conference on this topic, and the environment was there. You know, the place that got washed out with their river and their shops that 2 or 3 years in a row. But it's quite a remarkable place. I mean, I've seen them on Songs of Praise as well as having visited and seen it. But people do a bit of the guerrilla gardening, which is taking it even beyond church. But it's sort of grown to such an extent that, well, you can pick some of vegetables from literally outside the police station or outside over there if you need. People started then making soup or something else and hanging, you know, I've got this from your garden here, I'll return it because this is what I've made with it, and I've made a double quantity so that I can share it back. I think there's a lot that can grow out of such a very, very simple idea if we take it seriously. People will join in, which is the...
Well, I think that's another potential partnership with councils and people, because quite a lot of councils have land that either is costing them a lot of money to maintain, or they don't maintain it for that reason. And there was a big project in Middlesbrough and Teesside a few years ago where churches got together and managed to get funding to take a lot of it, ex-industrial land basically, that was heavily polluted, and got well-meaning partners, industrialists actually, to come in and take all the mess away. And they created a big community garden. And I'm trying to think of the statistics, but in the first year of their harvest, I think I'm right in saying that they had grew enough stuff to feed, was it 10,000 people showed up at a big picnic, or some huge number anyway, which obviously got the church's brownie points from the council. And the council was happy because the land had been cleaned up from all this industrial waste and mess. And the churches became the catalysts and the middle people, if you like, to make that happen. And I think that, you know, it's not just, I thought of the garden thing, but there'll be loads of other opportunities, I think.
There is I find if anyone watches these cookery programs or anything, I don't know, Hugh Fernley's Whittingstall had a project a number of years ago, but he identified, and this is good news if you're in England, it's not in Scotland, and I don't know about Wales, but they dug out some old piece of legislation that if, I think it's like 6 families, or, you know, a very small number, and a family can be any shape, you know, today. So half a dozen people can say to their local council or whoever's the governing body, we want some land because we want to grow vegetables. They have to comply. Now, typically they give, you know, a piece of land that's not particularly the best. But what Hugh Fernley Whittingstall did a whole series there with a group like this, and they went to like local the people who had the kind of machinery that clears land, and said, do you want to be involved in this? So it was just asking. It's often easier to beg on somebody else's behalf rather than your own, or I find that anyway. I can stick up for somebody else and say, these people need this, are you willing to help? And different businesses came, cleared the land, but the folks themselves did the hard work of gardening, and it was absolutely phenomenal to watch how people who had never gardened before and were living in a really, really quite a rough area, you know, to be honest, there was a big, strong guy with tattoos all over, and he had tears running down his face when he picked tomatoes that he'd grown. And you think there's something about transformation, connection with nature, and who's behind creation. We often talk about the world being the second Bible, the second piece of understanding and literature of God. So I think I'm passionate about that. You can probably tell. I'm getting excited.
I'm looking at the time here.
It's nearly gone.
I'm thinking it's nearly gone. So why don't you mention these books that you were going to suggest?
Yes.
And
we thought it's always helpful to know of something that, well, maybe I could latch into that. This book in particular, if I hold it, you hold it up. Yes, it's by Tom Bolsinger. Todd, sorry. And it's called Tempered Resilience. This is a book that is exceptionally good for leaders, because it's talking about the good thing is he's very vulnerable, as he writes himself. He bases it on story and a narrative of having been on holiday with his wife from the States, and he goes to Prague, I think it is, and it's based around a blacksmith's an experience of visiting a blacksmith, but actually going to a workshop and being shown how to use the tools and the sort of the heating, the hammering, the resilience, the tempering, all these different aspects that he goes into. And I found that taking a chapter and really living with it is incredibly helpful. So that's a book I would thoroughly recommend. I'm using it.
What's the surname again?
Bolsinger, Bolsinger, Bolsinger.
Yep.
I can highly recommend it. Our group on a Monday night at Glasgow University are really getting excited by it.
Yeah.
And not necessarily agreeing with absolutely everything, but talking about it. Here's this. No, not that. Yes, it is that one. Sorry.
Right, okay. Here's number 2.
Can you read it? It's backwards on our screen now, so I have.
No, you need to lift up a little bit. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
What's the title again?
Finding God.
Finding God in a Culture of Fear by Jo Cox-Darling, and the name might ring bells to some of you on this website. That's really good. Jo's a Methodist minister, become superintendent fairly recently with a young family, and she has engaged with her website and what she does, because she did amazing stuff during Advent in her local community. All based around angels. So there were angels popping up all over the place. So those are 2 really helpful books. You can see that that's quite a small book by comparison. So it's a quicker read, but very, very accessible. And this one, From Social Media to Social Ministry. This is one that you could give to people in your congregation. Those other 2 are particularly about leadership and people with responsibilities. This is one that's this particular person, Nona Jones, was asked by, she is a clergy person, but she was asked by Facebook to be their advisor on issues of faith, because she really understands how social media works. And it's a riveting read. She also has lots of podcasts and things that you can check out on YouTube. You'll find her quite an inspiring person. You can learn a lot about how to use the most basic things in social media if you...
Yeah, so if you're wondering how to use social media, Facebook in particular, obviously, and you don't know what's the difference between your own posts, groups, pages, how to use them most effectively, then this is the book that will definitely give you the answer to that question. She has it's very missionally oriented as to how to generate a following, if you like, on social media. And she knows what she's talking about big time. Yep.
And it's an easy read.
We've got a story from you as well.
And don't forget, children's books are full of wisdom. And just think, I think we've got this recorded.
We're going to share the screen.
So this one is.
Show you this. Right.
What do you have? What do you do with an idea? And when I first came across this, I promptly went and bought this book for several children that I knew. I think you'll like this.
Do
you enjoy reading children's stories? Do you enjoy reading them to children, your own children, or children you know? I've always done that, and but I never really thought about using them when I was speaking to adults until I was at a conference where the opening evening, it was for clergy, and people were arriving, they were tired, they journeyed, and the journalist was the first speaker. He was the speaker for that Friday evening after dinner. And what he did was to use a children's story. And it had the most profound effect on all the people there. And because they were tired, they were open to a story, and it wasn't a pressured session. And then I found this book, and it's just amazing. It's called What Do You Do with an Idea? It's written by Kobi Yamada, I think probably his name's pronounced, though I'm not sure. And it won the New York Times Bestseller Award. And when I read it, I promptly ordered some for my grandchildren and sent it to them, because this is just such a cool book. What would you do with an idea? Well, let's have a look. One day, I had an idea. Where did it come from? Why is it here? I wondered. What do you do with an idea? At first, I didn't think much of it.
It seemed kind of strange and fragile. I didn't know what to do with it, so I just walked away from it. I acted like it didn't belong to me. But it followed me. I worried what others would think. What would people say about my idea? I kept it to myself. I hid it away and didn't talk about it. I tried to talk like everything was the same as it was before my idea showed up. But there was something magical about my idea. I had to admit, I felt better and happier when it was around. It wanted food. It wanted to play. Actually, it wanted a lot of attention. It grew bigger, and we became friends. I showed it to other people, even though I was afraid of what they would say. I was afraid that if people saw it, they would laugh at it. I was afraid they would think it was silly. And many of them did. They said it was no good. They said it was too weird. They said it was a waste of time and that it would never become anything. And at first, I believed them. I actually thought about giving up on my idea. I almost listened to them. But then I realized, what do they really know? This is my idea, I thought. No one knows it like I do. And it's okay if it's different and weird and maybe a little crazy. I decided to protect it, to care for it. I fed it good food. I worked with it. I played with it. But most of all, I gave it my attention. My idea grew and grew, and so did my love for it. I built it a new house, one with an open roof where it could look up at the stars, a place where it could be safe to dream. I liked being with my idea. It made me feel more alive, like I could do anything. It encouraged me to think big and then to think bigger. It shared its secrets with me. It showed me how to walk on my hands because, it said, it's good to have the ability to see things differently. I couldn't imagine my life without it. Then one day something amazing happened. My idea changed right before my very eyes. It spread its wings, took flight, and burst into the sky. I don't know how to describe it, but it went from being here to being everywhere. It wasn't just a part of me anymore. It was now a part of everything. And then I realized what you do with an idea. You change the world. What are you going to do with your good ideas?
Okay, so I think it is definitely finishing time for us, and I'm trying to think. Well, we're heading back to Lucia, or
yeah. Thank you very much. That was so exciting in a way, cute and different. Wow. So thank you for all your contribution tonight, and I really pray that all the information that was given to us tonight will land into a very fertile soil and will produce fruit for the kingdom of God. I really, really pray for that. And just to let you guys know, I've recorded a session, so I will upload this to our website, and it will be, but don't worry about it. I'll send you a link with the website, with the link where you can find all the material. and also material from previous workshops and sessions that we did about post-pandemic church. So don't worry about that. And also, I very much would like a feedback from tonight's session. So I've got I think you all have my email address. So it would be really nice if you can, even 2 lines, you know, I think is really nice. Yeah. So I guess now is the time to ask Secretary Yvonne Campbell from Congregation Federation to close the session with a prayer.
Thank you, Lucia. Thanks for pulling us all together this evening. And thanks, John and Olive. Poppy been standing by me. She's 8. She's my daughter. She listened to you reading the story, so you've saved me a job there. Let's pray. Let's give this final time to God again. Lord Jesus, I thank you for this evening. I thank you for the wonders of technology that we've been able to share together, and I thank you especially for John and Olive. I thank you for their insight and their knowledge. I thank you for their time of sharing this evening. And I just pray protection over them and their families as they continue to serve you in this way of helping others and lecturing younger and ministers in their journey of fresh expressions and pioneering ministry, Lord. I just thank you for their sharing this evening. And as Lucia said, we pray for all of these ideas that we have heard and that you've started to kind of build in our minds. Lord, we just pray that they will land in fertile soil and that they will grow for your kingdom and where you have called us to serve. Lord Jesus, I really just pray for our creative spirit in us all. I pray that you will just continue to fill us with ideas and give us the courage to be able to share those ideas and pray those ideas through with someone else so that we can change the world. We can change the world so that more people know about you and your wonderful love for us. So we pray for discernment as well, discernment to know where and what you want us to do. I just thank you and that you are constantly with us. You are our source of strength and comfort. And I just pray a blessing over each one of us this evening as we take some time to rest and reflect on all that we've heard. And we pray that you just send your angels over us all so that we sleep peacefully and wake up tomorrow to start a new day. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, everyone. And you are free to go.